What, like? So in terms of the amount of tabs that I have got open on my screen right now, it's stream worthy. To be honest. However, I will try and refrain from the temptation to stream and just try to stick to the tabs that are on screen without going on too many tangents. But obviously, the news is broken today that Nicola Thinlips, my guru, my thin-lipped guru, has decided to step down from politics when it comes to the next election going forward in Scotland, as if that was supposedly a shock and or a surprise to anybody in the country, given the fact that she's barely been seen anywhere within the vicinity of our tin pot parliament since she departed, and obviously a couple of weeks later ended up embroiled in criminal allegations relating to missing finances alongside her bald, slaphead, questionably homosexual ex-husband. However, you know, and I mean, it's no secret, over the years, I have made so many videos on this bullcat-headed redacted. I will refrain from misogyny for the most part. But, you know, it didn't take long. Some of the articles to come out, such as this, you know, like her or loathe her, Nicola Thinlips is one of the most formidable politicians Scotland has ever produced. Nicola Sturgeon is about as formidable as the skin of a tangerine that could probably be found in the excrement post-shite from a chimpanzee's arsehole. Misogyny, regardless. I mean, fuck off. It's just cringe. Anyhow, right? It didn't take long. So that's one example, right? Oh, she's so formidable, like, Oh, what about this one? Nicola Thinlips remains the biggest name in Scottish politics from the BBC. Really? I mean, it's a pretty low bar if Nicola Sturgeon is considered the most or the biggest name in Scottish politics. Nicola Sturgeon had very much played a role for as long as I can recall, where she was given softball questions. She was able to revise history when it suited her. She was able to manipulate narratives when it suited her. And she was never pressed in any of her bollocks. She was never caught up in her own words. She was never forced to concede and or explain any contradictions that she made, past tense. You know, she got away with everything. And as a consequence of such, she was presented constantly as this strong, empowered female feminist, when in reality, she was just a thin-lipped dickhead. Okay? I'm sorry. Misogyny. That was my second strike, I guess.
So looking at the cause of independence, which you mentioned there, do you think you leave the cause of independence stronger than certainly when you came in 1999, but when you came in 2015 as First Minister?
Yes, I do. Now,
when you came in 2014?
I absolutely do. I think if you look at the strength of support for independence, amongst younger people in Scotland, that's way, beyond what it has ever been before. There's a lot of work still to do. We're not there.
But just before we move on to the next question, it'd be interesting to see from this room what people think about Europe and Brexit from what you feel you know. So by show of hands, who feels that they think Scotland and the United Kingdom should stay inside of Europe, the European Union? And who thinks, well, it's a lot of hands, does anyone feel we should leave the European Union? A few. We've got a few. So well done. And so there is, before we move on, people are kind of pro-Europe. And the last question is, who thinks that either way, whatever happens next, and I think it's fair to say no one really knows, who thinks there should be a second referendum on the European question no matter what? And again, the vast majority of the room. Very, very interesting.
One of many that I could provide to showcase that it's somewhat questionable for any politician, but obviously this is Nicola Thinlips talking about young people in particular are in favour of your quote-unquote independence, and they think that this is something that should be celebrated, as if this is something that's normal. It's just a change of the times. It's progressive. When the reality of the matter is, it could very much be argued that children are products of their environment. Children are products of an education system which has been heavily influenced by the SNP themselves. But don't let that stop you talking shite. Thinlips.
The issue of Parliament is debating today is the gender reforms which you got through but then were failed to be enacted. there's been an incredibly acrimonious, one of the most acrimonious discussions and debates I've seen in Scottish politics. Do you think you got that wrong?
Well, I think in some ways the answer to that question lies in the terms of your question. Whatever you think about the gender recognition reform bill, it's not in force. And therefore, the kind of things that are being debated right now are not impacted by that. They wouldn't have been, incidentally, even if it was in force, but it's not. Now, people can debate these things, debate them robustly. That is right and proper in any democracy. What I regret about this issue, what I regret about much of political discourse right now, and I take my share of responsibility for it, is the inability to debate things civilly and respectfully. People, politicians, claiming to be defenders of women's rights. I've never heard defend women's rights in the past. In fact, I've heard support policies like the rape clause, for example, that run counter to women's rights. We have legislation looming in later in this Parliament on criminal justice reform to try to deal with issues of low conviction rates for rape and sexual assault. We are likely to be dealing with legislation in months to come around abortion buffer zones. And I think it will be interesting to see how many of the so-called defenders of women's rights in the context of the trans debate suddenly don't think that all women's rights are actually important. And there are some people that I think have decided to use women's rights as a sort of cloak of acceptability to cover what is transphobia. Now, again, that's not everybody who opposes this bill. I want to be very clear about that. But there are people who have opposed this bill that cloak themselves in women's rights to make it acceptable. But just as they're transphobic, you will also find that they're deeply misogynist, often homophobic, possibly some of them racist as well. I regret about this issue, what I regret about much of political discourse right now, and I take my share of responsibility for it, is the inability to debate things civilly and respectfully. And I use women's rights as a sort of cloak of acceptability to cover what is transphobia. Now, again, that's not everybody who opposes this bill. I want to be very clear about that. But there are people who have opposed this bill that cloak themselves in women's rights to make it acceptable. But just as they're transphobic, you will also find that they're deeply misogynist, often homophobic, possibly some of them racist as well.
Debate things robustly, civilly, and respectfully, but yet when it came to the issue of gender, the gender recognition bill, she was very quick to claim that people were indeed racists. You know, she's no different to any other politician. She never was. This is what I'm saying. She's not formidable by any stretch of the imagination. She is literally the same as the rest of them, throwing hyperbolic bullshit slang at people. Even if it was enforced, but it's not. Now, people can debate these things, debate them robustly. That is right and proper in any democracy. Scotland led the world in becoming one of the first nations to declare a global climate emergency in April 2019. The need to take action to tackle climate change is more urgent than ever. 2019. Who was in charge? Nicola. Democracy. Or we could talk about the Well-Being Economy Initiative, which is a United Nations talking point, for lack of better terms. Regardless, it says here that making the transition to a well-being economy is a top priority for the Scottish Government. This means building an economy that is fair, green and growing, right? And then it goes on to say that Scotland is a founding member of the Well-Being Economies Government Group, okay? But it's not. Now, people can debate these things, debate them robustly. That is right and proper in any democracy.
Do you think you're leaving politics as what you said it yourself when you stood down as First Minister, as a bit of a divisive figure? You're loved by many, loathed by many others.
I don't know if it's possible to be in politics for as long as I have and not have a bit of that. And in a sense, that is part and parcel of a healthy, vibrant democracy. I do regret, and before you kind of throw this question at me, I accept I've been a frontline politician for best part of 3 decades now, I have to bear my share of responsibility, but I do regret and I deeply worry about the state of politics and political discourse right now, the toxic, polarised nature of it. And
I always find it remarkable how people like herself can sit there and dip poison into the well, dip their political, ideological poison into the well, then take a back seat after the fact and refer to the well in question and say, it's very toxic. You know, I hope as I sit upon my like moral high horse and stuff, like things will be different in the future. You know, I mean, Nicola Thinlips played a formidable role in the utter disgusting discourse that started to take place in Scotland. One of Scotland's biggest problems in the course of the past decade or so has been the infighting that has occurred for people that are even on some degree politically minded. And Nicola fucking Sturgeon was one of the worst perpetrators of fueling that fire. Absolutely. And then she waddles about constantly acting like a fucking victim. Everybody's a misogynist if they have anything to say to her that's untoward. And she stands there being interviewed by Colin Mackay in this interview, right? And over and over and over and over and over again, she refers to democracy. Okay, let's talk about democracy. I mean, everything that I've already showcased tab-wise, right? Who voted for that? None of us fucking did. By the way, this is what I'm told. Nicola Thinlips does not intend to hold referendum on EU membership if Scotland becomes independent. Big if, but let's just say past tense speaking, of course, if Scotland did eventually get its hypothetical referendum, and if Scotland overall voted to leave the UK, guess what? Where's the democracy then? No, you wouldn't have got it because according to Nicola Thinlips, it was synonymous with European Union membership, okay? And then, of course, you're going to hear the cries from the people with their Ukraine flags and their Palestinian flags and their blue hair and their cut-off cocks. Oh, well, you know, we were promised, like, 2014. We stayed in the UK. We would have got our EU membership. Oh, I mean, it's just, I'm sick to death of, like, even trying to rehash these blatant rebuttals. It's just self-explanatory, but regardless, that's not democracy, is it? This is not democracy. For your crybaby routines about democracy, I resist democracy, but it's fine because Nicola Thinlips said it. Nicola Thinlips that ruled out a referendum on rejoining the European Union post-independence. You know, that's democracy, of course. Yeah.
You stood down as First Minister as a bit of a divisive figure. You're loved by many, loathed by many others.
I don't know if it's possible to be in politics for as long as I have and not have a bit of that. And in a sense, that is part and parcel of a healthy, vibrant democracy. I do regret, and before you kind of throw this question at me, I accept I've been a frontline politician for best part of 3 decades now. I have to bear my share of responsibility, but I do regret, and I deeply worry about the state of politics and political discourse right now, the toxic, polarised nature of it. And I think we've all got to take a step back, accept why we're here, but work out collectively how we get back to a better model of democracy for the sake of generations to come after us.
How does it hurt?
I've always tried to kind of be open as a politician about, yes, you've got to have a thick skin, so it's really important you don't let every kind of arrow that's chucked at you, get to you, or you can do your job. But I've always believed, and this probably became clearest to me during COVID, as a politician, I think it's also wrong and dangerous to try to pretend you don't have any human emotions, that you don't feel. Eligible people who are not yet fully vaccinated are one of them, and if you have no good reason without good reason, every single dose of this vaccine right now, Scotland is the most vaccinated part of the UK. We're not complacent about that. We continue to press to speed this up every single day. And if you have no good reason without good reason, say pretty bluntly to people, if you are eligible and able to be vaccinated right now and you're choosing not to be vaccinated, then you're being deeply irresponsible. I would say you're being selfish. You're putting your own life much more at risk. You choosing without good reason not to be vaccinated is deeply irresponsible.
Vaccine passports that you're keeping in place, do they actually work in terms of reducing transmission?
Oh yeah, we're all human, you know. We're all human, apparently. But yet, Nicola Thinlips, throughout the duration, and I do apologise for the sort of backing track that came forth there with the compilation. It's an old video from way back in the day. But regardless, she dehumanized over and over and over again people that didn't want to take the vaccinations, you know. But she's got the temerity after the fact to talk about dehumanization and how we're all human. I'm sorry, I have to say this, and this might be strike 3 when I say this. Nicola Sturgeon is a fucking cunt.